currently in office, these are the statewide officers, like the Secretary of State, the Comptroller, the Treasurer, etc. And then judicial branch is one other branch of the three branches of government. But going back to the legislative branch, I want to pause there for a minute because that is the branch of government that I belong to, right? The legislature in Illinois is like Congress, but at the state level. And I am one of 118 House members, right? So in the legislature, we have the House chamber and we have the Senate chamber. And there are 118 House members that serve along with me. We each represent about 109,000 constituents in our districts. And so if you cover the entirety of Illinois, the 118 House districts, that covers all 13 million people in the state. And so, my job is to represent you, if you live in the district, and, you want me to pay attention to the decisions that are made in Springfield, so that I look out for your best interests. If there's a bill, which is basically a proposal, an idea that could become law, I will vote yes or no based on whether I think that it's good for my community, good for the state, or if it's not, then I will vote no or not support the passage of that bill. We can move on to the next section. I also have a district office, right? So, and these are the neighborhood areas that are within my district boundaries. So Back of the Yards, Bridgeport, Brighton Park, Chinatown, McKinley Park, and Hillston. So the population in those areas within the boundaries, there are about 109,000 people. And my job is to be your voice when decisions are made in Springfield. Okay. And so, this is just a slide about what our office does, the kinds of services that we can provide. We help constituents problem solve and interface with state agencies. So, there might be state agencies that deal with human services, the safety net, SNAP benefits, housing, healthcare, so Medicaid, for example, the highways, veterans affairs, seniors, elderly, people through the Department on Aging. So our office, which includes, I have 2 full-time staff, and actually I want to point them out, Maggie Lee and Ricky Drew. They're both. They hold down the fort in our office, and they provide services in English, Spanish, and 3 dialects of Chinese, right? So anybody can come, doesn't matter if your English is not perfect, you need assistance in Spanish or one of the Chinese dialects, we're here to serve. And, they're very patient, they, have helped people basically solve whatever problems they may encounter when they're dealing with state bureaucracy. So red tape, is what they're charged with cutting, right? So we are also part of State Senator Selena Villanueva's office. So she's the state senator that also covers our district. There are 2 House districts nested within a state Senate district. So 118 House districts, 59 state Senate districts, and this is your state senator. And then we'll move on. So we'll skip through the parts about Cook County government and city government, and then move on to what else? Okay, how a bill becomes law, right? So, there's city council and the county, but then we want to focus on, the state of Illinois and, how a bill becomes law, because in addition to my job running a constituent service office in the district and helping people with state agency issues, I also have to go down to Springfield, about 6 months out of the year. Right, and when I'm down in Springfield, what my colleagues and I do is, figure out if there's a way to solve problems on a larger scale. So if there's a way to pass a law that would, fix a problem, then, that's what we try to do. We'll file bills, which are just potential law in an idea form, right? And it becomes part of the public record. That means anybody can be involved in this process, even though I'm the state representative and I have the ability to actually file the bill and talk to my colleagues about it and eventually vote on it. All of you can engage in the process because this is part of the public record. And once a bill is filed, you can look it up on our state system, ilga.gov, right? That's the public record of our proceedings, and anything that is officially filed, you'll see the language. And it starts the public process of, the bill's journey potentially into becoming law. So a bill gets filed, and then the leadership team in the speaker's office, so I'm a member of the speaker's leadership team. We'll go through every single bill that's filed and make a decision about whether, it should be assigned to a committee, whether it moves forward. The committees are smaller groups of my colleagues that are interested in a particular issue or set of issues. And if a bill gets sent to a committee, for example, I used to be the chair of healthcare licenses, and anything that had to do with our laws that set out, the rules and regulations for what it takes, for somebody to become a nurse or a real estate agent or, anything that requires a professional license, there's a law that lays out all those details. And so a bill that has to do with healthcare licensing would get sent to that committee. And then the bill sponsor, is taking charge of the bill. They're like the quarterback, of the bill passage process. They're going to present the details of the bill to the committee members, and the committee members will say, yeah, I think if this might be potentially a good idea for us to consider, as a general assembly, as a body, in the House chamber, for example. And then so, that public hearing is also open to the public. You can always watch. You can log on to ilga.gov and watch our proceedings in committee, or when we're voting for something on the floor as a general, as a House chamber or the Senate chamber. So when the bill is presented before a committee, people can have the ability to say whether they're for it or against it. They can put that in the public record. And sometimes, there are lobbyists or, anybody who's affected by the bill, they might say, well, this is going to affect me in this way. I don't think it should pass. And so, those views are taken into account and they're part of the public record. During the bill passage process, you would have the ability, if it's been assigned to a committee, there's a witness slip process, and we have a segment of this PowerPoint that walks you through the witness lit process. And so that's how you would put your opinion about the bill on the record, if you're opposed or you're for. And anybody can do this. You don't have to be an elected official. You don't have to have any particular job title. You don't have to be a lobbyist to do this. So we could move forward to the section on, so the next slide is just a different diagram about how the bill becomes a law. Right, or, okay, so this is federal level, but we can move on to the state level. And then, okay, so you have the ability to have a say, whether you fill out a witness slip or if you go down to Springfield and meet with the legislators to influence their vote. You know, you can tell your story about how a proposed bill would affect your life. You know, whether you're opposed to it or whether you're in favor. Okay, and so we can move on to ways that you can advocate. You can call, you can talk to your legislator, fill out a form out online, you can come meet with us in Springfield, meet with us in our office, or you can fill out a witness slip. And I think that the next few slides will go through very quickly. That's how we would fill out a witness slip so that your voice is part of the official record. And during the committee hearing, the chair will say, you know, to look at the computer screen and look at the record to see, you know, 500 people have filled out witness slips in opposition, and 700 people have filled out witness slips in support, right? So, you know, this is how your voice can make a difference in our decisions. And I'll talk about that as well when we talk about the budget process. Because in addition to passing bills, proposing bills and considering whether bills that are proposed by my colleagues are worthy of voting yes on or not because of how they affect you, I also have a role every year in passing the state budget. Okay, and so I want to get us started with like a 1-minute video on how the budget gets passed. And so this will give us a little overview.
How are we creating smart, equitable budgets that work for Illinois? It starts by the governor outlining his priorities for the House and Senate in a joint legislative session. The appropriations committees will then begin the work of building the state budget, with each focusing on a specific subject matter. For the House, there are 6 committees, including Health and Human Services, Elementary and Secondary Education, Higher Education, Public Safety, Personnel and Pensions, and Government Administration, also known as General Services. These committees review the governor's proposed budget line by line while considering expenditures for the past year. Legislators also discuss their priorities, including their proposals for additional investment and savings. Experts from state agencies and community service providers share their insights with the committees and answer questions about how their services are administered. This helps legislators prioritize spending and hold recipients accountable for their use of taxpayer dollars. The Senate goes through a similar process. Once it is signed by the governor, the new plan takes effect on July 1st.
Okay.
Ah.
Okay, so, as you saw in the video, I know it went by really fast. This is where I break it down and, you know, go more slowly so you understand each part of the process. So every year, the budget process begins sometime in late February, when the governor comes before the members of the General Assembly. He has a proposed budget, right? Like his ideas for how the budget should look. And it starts with a forecast that he gets in the months before. So whether at the end of the year, usually at the end of the previous year, His office, as well as COGFA, which is the Committee on Government Forecasting and Accountability, they come up with an estimate of how much money is gonna come in to the state of Illinois. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the sources of money that goes into the state piggy bank, right? It comes from income tax, right? All of your families file their income tax, both at the federal level and the state level every year, right? And so the state income tax, personal income tax, that's one part of, what goes into the bank account, right? The corporate income tax, what companies have to pay, that also goes into the state bank account. And then sales taxes, like when you buy things at the store and you see the sales tax at the bottom of your receipt, that also goes into the state piggy bank. And then we have some money from the federal government. And one example is Medicaid matching funds, our Medicaid healthcare system, for those who, are under a certain income level. And then also the Medicaid expansion, Obamacare, through Obamacare, that brings us some funding from the federal government because the federal government pays for a big part of that. Right, so, that gets totaled up in an estimate at the end of the year. And then the governor has an idea of, okay, well, this is how much money we have. And this is my proposal for how we should spend it. But as you know, it's not the governor's job to dictate, how much, or, the budget gets passed by the legislature. It's actually our job to approve the final budget. So the governor's proposal is a starting point. He proposes his priorities and based on discussions with his state agencies and things that he might want to do. And so, he gives us an outline with his ideas for what he thinks the budget should look like during that year. But what happens after February when he gives this proposal is the next slide. Okay, so going back to the video, right? We have, and this is in the House, it's similar in the Senate, but they have different committees. We have these committees, appropriations committees, that, help us, the legislature, come up with the final numbers that we would like to see in the budget, right? Because as I said, it's the legislature that has the final say on the budget. We're the ones that vote. And so all of these committees, stay on that slide. The state agencies will send their staff to present before these committees, or organizations that get funding to run their organizations. They'll come before these committees and say, okay, this is how much we got last year, this is how much we have spent, this is how much we need to either grow or sustain ourselves with the programs that people need for this following year. And so they come to these committees and they ask for what they would like to see in the budget, right? So the State Board of Education, for example, that's the agency that governs all the public schools in the state of Illinois. They'll send their staff to the K-12 Education Appropriations Committee, and they'll say, well, this is how much we need. These are the programs we have, and, this is what we'd like to see in the budget for this year. Same for higher education. So, for the last 8 years, during the first 4 years of my term, I served on K-12 education appropriations. Because, I really cared about how our public schools were funded. And now I've transitioned over to higher education. And so, all the presidents of the different colleges and universities in the state that that receive public money, state money, they'll come before us and say, our buildings are falling down, we need this much more, to make sure we have enough residence halls for our students, we need this much more to, graduate this many students, have these kinds of programs, so they make their case. And then we'll have other entities that, use some state monies. The Student Assistance Commission, they come before us and they say, okay, we got this amount for MAP grants last year. We would like to give out more MAP grants for students who are low income that want to go to college. And so they make their case to the General Assembly. So this will take, several weeks, maybe up to a couple of months for all of the people who are looking for money in the budget to come before our committees. And then in April, what happens April 15th? Tax day, right? So April 15th is tax day. And then so after April 15th, COPFA, that commission that, gives us the estimate of how much money we have in the state piggy bank, they're able to adjust their numbers and, give us a more accurate number of, well, how much money came in from state taxes this year? And income taxes, corporate taxes, sales taxes, all those different sources that we talked about before. And so I put in a slide here that gives you an idea of, for example, the revision from this past April compared to what the forecast was at the beginning of the year. Right? So, the numbers just adjusted a little bit. And on the next slide, it just gives an explanation that COGFA's revisions, had some increases, based on, what really came in. But at the end of the day, we were still $1 billion short of the total amount that the governor wanted to spend. Right? So actually, almost $1.5 billion less than what the governor proposed when he presented his budget address in February. And what this means is that after we get these more accurate numbers, the next slide, please. We go through these budget negotiations. The speaker, so this is just the process in the House chamber. It's very similar in the Senate, but the speaker and the budgeteers, who are his main, lieutenants that are focused on the budget, they are in conversation with the appropriations committees. Right, the appropriation committees actually hear from the people who are getting money from the budget and, making their case for more. The speaker and the budgeteers also hear from the sub caucuses. So, in our 108 member House chamber, we have 78 Democrats that also have sub caucuses of like groups that are, people with similar interests, like the Women's Caucus, the Black Caucus, Latino Caucus, and the Asian American Caucus. I don't know if you all know, but there are 8 Asian Americans in the Illinois House. And, I am leader of that caucus. And so I take all of their views and sort of share them. So we come up with priorities that we want to champion. And I tell the speaker and the budgeteers what our priorities are, right? So we have an extra voice in this process because we have enough Asian American members with similar interests to be able to tell the speaker, this is what we would like to see in the budget. And then the individual members of the House Democratic Caucus also get to have meetings with the budgeteers and the speaker or the budget director. And so there are all these conversations going on. Then next slide. And then you also have a role in these conversations, because as we're talking about how the budget should look, how much money do we spend on, this line versus that line? What are our priorities? Then we see you in Springfield and you come to our office and say, this is really important to me, please make sure it's in the budget, right? Like, programs that actually make a difference in your lives, right? And you tell your stories, you tell us exactly how it affects you if this program didn't exist, right? Like a lot of people here in Chinatown, they have homemakers or, assistants that come to their home to do, some small tasks, so they don't have to go live in a nursing home. Right, so the state invests some money into that program, so we don't have to pay more for, a senior to go live in a nursing home, isolated somewhere and, away from their families. So when we hear from you and we hear about what's important to you, it gives us more ammunition to say, when we're having these discussions with the speaker and the budgeteers, please don't cut this because it's important to my community, right? Those discussions are happening every single day in April and May. And according to the Constitution of Illinois, we have to finish everything by May 31st. And so every day, from February to May 31st, we're having these discussions about what's important, what do we pay for? What do we cut? How do we raise the money so there's no budget deficit, right? Because we have to pass a balanced budget. We don't want to borrow money or go into debt or, ruin our credit rating. So it's very important that we make these decisions. We have to balance a lot of things to get to a balanced budget. Right, so next slide. Okay, so during these negotiations, like you saw what conversations happened in the House chamber. At the very top level, the speaker, who is basically the spokesperson for the House, and the Senate president, who's representing the Senate, and the people in the governor's office, they sit down in a room, for hours and hours on end. And they go through line by line. How much should we be spending on this program, that program? These are line items in the budget, right? It gets very specific. And they're haggling back and forth. The speaker might be able to say, because, he hears from a large number of his members that have constituents like you who went to Springfield or called our offices and said, don't cut this program, don't spend less money on public education. Our public schools need the money, or our seniors, need the community care program. or, you know, don't cut Medicaid, or, you know, any of these, programs that we have a say in, right? So the governor, the Senate president and the speaker have to come to an agreement so that we have, 3 bills to pass, which make up the entirety of the budget. The fiscal year 2026 budget, which we passed this year, has all the numbers, the line items. And then the revenue package. So the revenue is, okay, how do we make up for the $1.5 billion shortfall? We didn't have enough in the piggy bank. The checkbook isn't balanced, right? You don't have enough money to pay for all the things that we want in the budget. So what gets sacrificed? You know, do we cut the CCP program? Do we send less money into public schools? Or do we figure out a way to bring in more revenue, more money into the state coffers? You know, one idea, you know, that we always think is the last, the worst idea, the last ditch effort, you know, that's to raise the income tax. We don't want to do that, right? Because you don't want your income tax raised. You don't want sales taxes raised. You don't want, you know, to be spending more money on taxes, right? But we still have all these programs that we want to pay for. And so how do we do that? So some of the discussion involved, you know, how do we raise revenues, but, you know, we don't make everyday people pay for it, you know? So we ended up coming up with ideas this year that close some loopholes so that big corporations that, you know, had ways to evade their taxes, you know, they had, you know, parts of their companies overseas or things like that. We found a way to make sure that they paid their fair share. And so most of the ideas in the revenue package came from you know, fixing these loopholes so that like big companies ended up paying extra taxes, or, you know, paid for things that they were trying to get away with not paying, so that we closed this $1.5 billion deficit. We also asked the governor to come back to us with some ideas for how we could make his state agencies more efficient. And so there were some cuts that the governor made to his state agency budget. And we ended up passing a $55.2 billion budget that maintained a lot of good programs for people, like, you know, math grants. If you didn't spend less on public education, we tried to increase. We knew there would be a need to strengthen our ability to provide health care, and so there was more money for FQHCs and free charitable clinics and safety net hospitals. We didn't want to threaten our safety net program, and so we managed to have these discussions to the point where we came up with ideas to pass a balanced budget that was responsible and responsive to our constituents, and kept in place programs that, you know, you all want to keep in place. And then there are things in the budget and in bills that we passed in the next slide. I don't know if you can see this very clearly, but you know, programs that really, that we see the impact of in our communities, right? Like immigrant services line item, you know, they, at welcoming centers, like, so Quintox Center gets funding for welcoming centers and immigrant services. We didn't want that to be cut. The parent mentor program is very popular in our community. And, we've heard from them, they came down to Springfield to advocate for themselves, we made sure that that was not cut. Programs like Teen Reach, I mentioned before, MAP grants for, families that want to send their kids to college, but, their income might not be, high enough. So that's to help them, our K through 12 education systems or public schools. Subsidies for for families to send their kids to childcare or early childhood programs. CCP, the homemakers and disability service providers, they also got a rate increase in the amount that the state would reimburse them, so they got a raise. One of the things that the Asian American Caucus advocated for was $2 million for inclusive history, so being able to implement the Teach Act, teaching Asian American equitable community history, which is something that we passed a couple of years ago. But inclusive history is not just the Asian American history portion, but other inclusive histories. Access to justice program that provides legal assistance to immigrants and communities dealing with returning citizens, child tax credit, the Secretary of State's office budget, IDOT for roads and bridges, things like that. So, there are a lot of good things in the budget and, not a lot of cuts that affect, our community members. And so we're very proud of it, but it was a very challenging process. It involved a lot of negotiation, a lot of discussion, and, listening to people, right? So it was always good to see, when you come down to Springfield, it was good to see you and to know that you're active in this process. It helps me a lot because I can, say, hey, my community members came down to talk to me and this is really important to them. So I'm able to have more power behind my request that something isn't cut. Next slide. I think, so we are at the question and answer period.
Yes.
And
Thank you very much, Representative Ma, for so guys, a lot of information. We're going to, if you have questions, please feel free to line up next to the microphone or behind the microphone to ask your questions. But we have a few questions. I just got one from online and I will ask that first. And then we have some staff and volunteers that had some prepared questions. And then any community members that have questions, please line up.喺個批前面排隊，我哋有啲已經準備咗一啲問題，同埋呢個問題係喺網上有到嘅。So I'm gonna my glasses to this. Okay, so the question from Zoom was, once the bill is passed and signed into law, who or how is it enforced? Which government agency is responsible for non-criminal laws that are not being applied or enforced?
I guess it depends what subject matter, what specific law it is, and, sometimes the bill will lay out an enforcement mechanism. And sometimes, I think it depends, if it's, for example, something that has to do with the Human Rights Commission, then, that would be a case that would be brought to the Human Rights Commission. But I think it really depends on, what law we're talking about. It could be it could be anything, and so I think I would need to have a more specific example of like which. Specific law we're talking about, but the Attorney General is also, you know, the. You know, chief. Enforcement officer for the state, and so, you know, he's. Ultimately in charge of enforcement of, state laws.
Thanks, yeah, I think we'll have, the questions come, yeah. Go ahead.
Can you give us an update about
That's not on,
Oh, that's right.
mine's on.
So can you give us an update about the state funding for the Chinatown Reach for South Hospital?
Yes, okay, so, that, funding was put into the budget several years ago. And it's something that we have to work on with the city of Chicago. And the last update, you know, from the previous mayor was that, you know, she had a proposal for a site that we didn't think was feasible, and so, you know, I wanted more community input and, the possibility of looking at, a site that would be better for the community. With the new administration, the intention was to restart the discussions about, that project and find a site that, would be good for, a high school, you know, near Chinatown, Chinatown South Loop. You know, in this area that would serve the community, but we haven't really made very much progress. On that topic, you know, we haven't set a meeting yet, but, you know, that could be something that we, you know, with your, advocacy, you know, we can make sure to contact the city and see where they are with that. But I think that, you know, there have been some challenges in the last couple of years with instability, you know, with their CEO and, you know, CTU negotiations and everything, you know, so there's been a lot of delays and challenges in finding time to focus on that particular, discussion. But yes, well, we can reach out to the city and see if we can sit down at some point and restart those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alan, and I have a question about the 78th East Coast Line, Chinatown. So recently, there's been some developments in the 78th. Most recent one is the fire stadium being expanded. And this question is asking like, what role does the state play in with the proposed like Chicago Fire Stadium in the 78th?
Yeah, so from my understanding, that's a private project that the owners said that, you know, they would be able to fund the entire project themselves. And so because of that, you know, they weren't asking the state for anything, and so the state doesn't play a role in that process. There were previous proposals from the White Sox, I believe. You know, they wanted the state to include some help, you know, some subsidies and, you know, our role initially was to like decide yes or no if we would be, interested in that. And I think the main conclusion, you know, since those talks didn't move forward, was that, you know, it wasn't a good time to, you know, for the state to, add money or, you know, agree to subsidize that project, because, you know, as you saw in the presentation, we were already $1.5 million short. Even before considering the governor's initial, revenue proposals, and so, you know, it's too, difficult, time in our state's, budget to, consider doing that, because, people want the programs that help them. And, they didn't think that, most people did think that spending state money, tax dollars to subsidize, something, for a wealthy, team owner would be a good use of tax dollars.
So overall, it was like pretty like independent on the state side to like.
Yeah, so it depends on what the proposal is, so in the case of the Chicago fire, they said themselves that they could pay for the whole thing without getting any state help.
Hello, I'm Sharon. I have a question regarding federal funding cuts. So does the state of Illinois budget get affected, especially Medicaid and SNAP?
Yes, we are very dependent on the federal government for the federal government's portion of Medicaid, right? And so, if there are changes to Medicaid, the state will be affected. But right now, the federal government has not passed a new budget. They've only proposed something and it passed in the House, but, it hasn't gone forward in the Senate. And so, there's still a lot of uncertainty as to what exactly, will be passed. And I know that there are a lot of advocacy efforts to try to, prevent that from happening. But in the event that they decide to make cuts to Medicaid, it will in fact affect the state, because the way Medicaid works is we put up half the money and the federal government pays for the other half. So it's a huge portion that, we won't be able to cover if that disappears. But right now, we don't know the details of like how much they're cutting and, what exactly will happen. What the shape of it will be when something does pass. One of the things we've been hearing a lot about is work requirements and things like that, which, are gonna be really tough for the people who are currently on Medicaid, because, they're already not in a position to work. Or many of them who do, they're already working, sometimes multiple jobs, and they just don't make enough to pay for their own healthcare. So, so there are some very serious challenges ahead, but we don't know the details as yet.
I think you're. Hi, my name is Katie and,
Speak into the mic.
yeah,
Just lower it, like angle it lower. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Katie, and I have a question about the fiscal year 26 state budget. So the fiscal year 26 state budget has not addressed the case funding gap. In light of possible cuts to public transit funding, what all plans do you and the state legislature have? Community members are concerned that services like the number 24 to 62 bus routes could be affected.
Yes, no, thank you for that question. So, all during this past session, we, were working really hard to come up with a proposal to, avoid the public transit, budget cliff, right? So because of, decline in ridership and the running out of money that the federal government gave us during the pandemic, our public transit system, could lose money really fast in the upcoming year. And so it was our responsibility at the state to come up with a way to address that so that our CTA system, Metra, PACE, they don't suddenly collapse, right? So I was, very, very strong in my advocacy, understanding that our district is very dependent on mass transit. And so, I was gonna vote for like whatever proposal we came up with. And we did come up with a pretty comprehensive plan by the end of May. And that plan included a dramatic overhaul, like a reform of, those mass transit systems to make them work more, coherently together. There'd be like one fare card and, one governing board that would eliminate, we had like 4 different governing boards that was very confusing and a lot, people thought that it was a waste of resources. And so we did come up with a plan that included these reforms and created a new umbrella, governing, agency. And that would have saved some money. But then there was a need to, bring in additional revenues to close that gap so that the systems could continue to operate. And so there was a bill that did pass in the Senate that included ideas for revenue. And then also this, reform, set of reforms. And it passed the Senate, but there wasn't enough time before midnight, May 31st, for it to come to the House and pass and get enough votes from all the House members. We needed 60 votes. So what we're gonna do is continue, these conversations are continuing to happen. The disagreement or, the challenge was getting 60 members to agree to the transit plan, the revenue plan that they had. And so we're gonna continue to talk about other ideas that more people might agree with. And there is a possibility of coming back for special session sometime in the summer to pass that bill. Or come back in October and to do it. But it's gonna take more coordination and discussions because after May 31st, we need 71 votes in the House to pass. And it's just a little bit more challenging to, get more people to agree on something that's controversial among your members. Because they don't want necessarily, they don't want to raise fares or raise taxes for everyday people. Want to find a way to do it that works, but that isn't gonna cause, suffering among, our constituents. And so, there is a plan to solve this problem. I think there are a lot of people that are committed to it, but I can't tell you whether, we're gonna come back in the summer or wait till October to do it, but it's important enough. And most of us know that it's important enough that we have to get it done.
How do you suggest community members keep up with these updates as they come out?
You can subscribe to my newsletter, and keep up with current events, the local papers will be reporting on that, and also there are certain agencies, organizations that are really focused on the transit issue. And so they'll be the best ones to provide updates because they want to mobilize all of you to get involved and to, talk to legislators, because not everybody's gonna feel the same way as I do, right? Like, I'm really committed to getting the bill passed, but, I might have a colleague in another part of the state that says, it doesn't really affect my constituents that much, so, I'm gonna vote against it if it doesn't do X, Y, Z, I think that we have to convince as many people around the state as possible how critical this is, because, there are a lot of people concentrated in northern Illinois that depend on transit, so, yeah. Any involvement, would be really important. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Laura. I have a question about your leadership role. So you stated earlier that you have a leadership role in the state House of Rep.
you explain a little bit more about what it is and maybe some of the more notable like efforts and work that you've advocated for?
Sure. So, since, 2022. I've been a member of the speaker's leadership team. And what that means is, okay, so the Speaker of the House, like I said, is in charge of how the House of Representatives run. And the Speaker decides, who's gonna be the chair of different committees. So at the beginning of each General Assembly, right, so after there's we're elected or re-elected and get sworn in, we vote for the Speaker, and then the Speaker gets to decide, what committees there should be, who chairs them, and then he picks his leadership team of, we're like his special advisors, right? And it involves quite a bit of work actually, because, when the General Assembly started in January, we would have to meet every Sunday for 2 or 3 hours to go through all the bills that were filed to decide if this bill moves forward, gets sent to a committee, or if it stays in the Rules Committee. Basically, it's like killed in rules. So, there were 4,000 bills, more than 4,000 bills that were filed, in after the General Assembly started. So we had a lot of work, deciding, okay, well, this is a waste of time, or this goes against, our values, so we're doing the screening of the bills that can be considered by the entire legislature or by the House. And, I take a lot of pride in being given that position, because it includes a lot of responsibility as well. But it's also, more of a voice that, our community has, because, I have a say in those decisions, I'm in the room where it happens, right? In some ways, and, so that's part of it. My specific role on the Speaker's leadership team, my title is Majority Conference Chair. And so, when our House Democratic Caucus meets to, discuss how we're voting on things or, specific issues, I chair those meetings, and, I get to call on people and make the meeting move along, or, so that's my technical role, but, I'm part of a group of about 20 people who are basically the Speaker's special advisors, and, we play a role in deciding, what legislation lives or dies in the General Assembly. So, and, we also have the Speaker's ear more often than the average General Assembly member. So, it just means that, you all have more say in what happens in our House chamber as well.
Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Ramona. We'll read off this thing. So the 12th District Police Council, the elected police oversight body, they posted a statement yesterday regarding the action of ICE in our city. Many of these agents have been masked. They're not identifiable, and they're operating from unmarked vehicles. Many of our residents have been targeted, including protesters outside the ICE courthouse at 55 East Monroe a few weeks ago, stated. So the 12th District Council is calling for our elected officials to enforce a stronger identifying policies for them and for the agents, and also public condemnation of the actions from ICE. And outside of the 12th District Council statement, I think a lot of our residents, many from our immigrant communities have been, are very scared regarding the actions of ICE in the city, and also those things we've been seeing across the country. So we're wondering, do you have any, a statement regarding this, or has there been action that your office has been taking regarding this?
Yes, I'm aware of this issue, and there have been some discussions with my colleagues about what we can do at the state level to, make sure that folks are properly identified and, aren't operating in the way that they have. There are certain things we need to figure out, like, what jurisdiction we have, because these are federal officers. But it is something that we're starting to look at, and we're doing, we're investigating, what's been done in other states, or, if there's precedent in legislation that's been proposed in other states that address this issue. But yeah, I think it's important that, we have the interests of our residents in mind at all times. And, I think that, what's happening is, really egregious and heartless. And, we've done what we can to, pass legislation in the last few years. For example, like, so that, in Illinois, the law is that local law enforcement, can't, assist. They don't work for the federal government, they don't work for ICE, they can assist, and, they keep, separate because, we want our law enforcement to maintain the trust of, our local residents. Right, and that won't happen if, they are, helping, helping ICE, yeah.
So follow-up question to that, have there been any reports either within the city or the state of Illinois of maybe mass individuals where they've been pretending that they're ICE and it turns out they're not? Have there been any reports regarding that? Like,
I haven't heard of any, but yeah, I can't be sure, I haven't heard of any or seen anything like that or reported in the local media. But, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Thank you for having this meeting today. My name is Ezra. I have like 2 questions, so please bear with me. So first question is like, I was trying to help my relative, like applying for their, I was talking to my relative, applying for their passport, like, 2 months ago or something, at Chinatown, USPS. And, the staff are very, very rude, and they're saying like, why are you applying for American passport if you don't speak English? And also like your folks, like having a lunch break, just anytime, like I went there last week too, and they have a lunch break at like 3:30, which is they're closed at 5. So people just waiting out there and they're just doing nothing. They're just seeing the people waiting out there, but they're just saying like, no, we're having our lunch break. So I was just like, I know it's like a federal like department, so I don't know if you can do anything about it. And also the second is like this month, the low income families, so they're like the state benefit completely wiped out the split. Living there without money for groceries for an entire month. So why have like either city or state office staffing for to like address these issues? Thank you.
Okay, so with regard to the complaints about the post office. Yes, that is a federal agency, and so we don't have oversight over them, but we can help connect you to the congressman's office or the senator's office. And make sure that they share with you what the protocol is for filing complaints, and to see if there's anything specific they can do about that. But yeah, unfortunately, we don't have any say over the post office or their employees, but definitely willing to help connect you with the member of Congress and their office, so that they can weigh in on this issue. With regard to the SNAP benefits, yes, so, we heard about, the fraud that affected a member of the community, and, we immediately got in touch with the Department of Human Services. And they shared with us, how they're advising people to, protect their SNAP, their link cards. And to, change the password and to freeze or unfreeze it to prevent this from happening in the future. I asked them about whether, they are, investigating, working with law enforcement to investigate, these instances, and they said they were, but they couldn't give any specific information about, cases or where they are, but they do work with, whatever level of law enforcement is appropriate to investigate these crimes. And then, for people who, I know it's like really challenging when, somebody suddenly loses all the, value of their link card and, they have no, food benefits for the month. Our office is, so we can assist people with like locating the, nearest food pantry, or food assistance program in the community. But, we don't have any budget or resources to rectify any of those thefts ourselves. So, the Greater Chicago Food Depository, has a search tool for finding the closest food pantries, and and we know all of those food pantries, and then monthly distributions, we organize one ourselves. And I think unfortunately, that's the best we can do, and pointing people to other resources that can help, make up for their loss of benefits. So, we try to help them access, other resources.
Sorry, just trying to follow on the first one, like the USPS one.
Yeah.
So, because like there's so many athletes, including my family, like in the community, they don't speak English.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if is there any resources, sorry.
Oh. Yeah. So, so Ricky was just saying that, we can follow up with our colleagues at the federal level, to, deal with the post office issue. And we have had these discussions before, with our, with regard to like the Pilsen office, there was a retirement of like a really key staff member who was bilingual, and so that was an issue that has been brought up, and we've been trying to figure out how to address that. But I know that there are issues at all the postal services, and we're happy to work with our federal colleagues to help solve that problem.
Because I would just like hoping there have more like bilingual like resources or something like that. Especially for the public services, like for the elderly community. Because they're always like went to the state one, because like traveling clothes, they have to walk all the way to the state, which is really inconvenient, so.
Yeah, no, I am well aware of that, because, we were involved, many years ago, I think more than 10 years ago, when they actually proposed that they would eliminate that post office altogether. And so CBCAC was, we led that campaign to save that post office because of how important it was to the members of our community. But this issue of needing bilingual assistance is very real and valid. And we need to figure out how to address that, because, you know, there's another layer of complication in that the postal service is represented by, you know, they have their own, union and like bargaining, contract with where, you know, there are certain, procedures for moving from one office to another and promotions and things like that. And one of the issues that they brought to my attention when we last had this conversation about needing more bilingual postal workers is that, you know, there's a mismatch between like those who have those skills and their ability to transfer into the office that they want to work in, you know, because of the seniority system. And so, you know, that's a complication that we're gonna have to work with our federal colleagues to see if we can come up with a creative solution or work with the union to figure that out, you know, in their bargaining process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sophia. Actually, this question is about the human rights. And I'm actually working at National. And the question is for the national element overall the state. But I understand that this is the state law. It is also really difficult to move on this bill because I also been asking that administration, but they say because it's the state law, the question is about, I understand that sometimes it's the state law put like the national benches, the map, you cannot put up the full as I will. The whole stand on the benches, the map, you know what I'm talking about, right? The sidewalk that, the whole map.
Oh, Stan?
Right.
Yeah.
And according to the state, they say in the appeal for the elderly, for the residents. Yeah. Person is their freedom of, is their freedom and is the appeal is we put all that side. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can say, because I've heard this from you before. So you cannot put up all four of the bed rails. Yeah. Because it would constitute, you know, tracking the person and therefore abuse. So the concern is sometimes for seniors, they might fall off the bed, at least that's what.
Right, and actually, it happened a lot that some of the elderly is really sweet and they can fell. They can sleep on the mat to the floor. But according to the state law, is ability back and we put the full side back up. And the other question is, they say it's okay because they put down like lower mat that is going to be eliminated already. But they some of the case actually they tried it before, it's still, even though they lower the mat, it's still the resident can fall because they don't have they are really skinny.
Yeah.
So is it possible that actually I think it can be done, like is case by cases, like what happened if one of the elderly is really can slide on the floor. So that is possible, the family can request to put all that slide up.
Okay, well, this is my first time hearing about this problem, but this is exactly the type of problem solving that, you know, is part of my job. You know, I can look more into it and then, you know, see if we can, propose something that, you know, takes into account these special circumstances.
Because actually, the finding is not what was is overall the entire Alabama state. So it's not the national problem, it's the state law.
Okay, so, you know, I have a group of 5 interns, in my office this summer. And, you know, if any of them is interested in this issue, maybe they can do some research and, help me, figure out if there's something we can do legislatively on this issue. I think it'd be a good project if there's any interest among any of the interns this summer. So, this is like how policy work begins, right? If somebody has a problem that we could potentially solve with legislation. And
Actually, have do the petitions, like for the nurse or the staff to have, including the, like, all the samples, and pretty much sure they are going to sign. But the thing is, I also asked my administrator already, they say it's very difficult because it's the state law.
okay, so we'll do some research and find out what state law says that and whether there's any room for amending it so that it accommodates what you're looking for. Okay?
Mrs. Wong has a question, she'll ask in the non-trustee.
議員你好，係首先咧我就首先咧我都想support 阿 Amy 咧，佢講嗰個問題咧係的確有存在嘅，因為我媽媽而家都係喺康復中心嗰度，試過幾次咧無啦啦電話打嚟話啱啱跌咗落地啊咁樣，咁即刻衝去啦，問嗰啲護士啲護工係乜嘢回事，佢哋話冇人知道。 總之就係見到女仔坐咗喺地下，咁樣就依家都唔知究竟佢係因咩事咧，咁樣跌咗喺個地下度嘅。所以阿 Amy 正話講到咧，就話關於啲康復中心啊、老人院咧，啲床啊係唔俾圍住晒嗰啲攔住啲老人家，所以好多老人家咧都有咁嘅。 試過咧喺間床度，佢哋瞓着覺或者乜嘢唔知道碌咗落床，冇人知道係發生咩事嘅。呢件事咧都係發生喺我媽媽嘅身上，所以我係好 support 佢將呢件事即係解釋出嚟咯。
So before Mrs. Wong asked the question, she wanted to support what Amy was saying that this happened to her mother too in the nursing home, that because the nursing home prohibits the that rails from all four rails coming up, she has had incidents where the nursing home calls her to say your mom has rolling off the bed and it's on the floor, and then they rush over to see what's going on. So what Amy is asking for, she had experience in that. So she also appreciates the representative.
係，即是起碼都俾我哋家屬表達我哋需唔需要咁，或者我哋有咩要求，即係唔好話用一個 law 就可以講晒話，即係唔得啦咁樣。OK， 好我而家再講翻我自己嘅問題。首先喺呢度咧，我代表我哋呢度咁多嘅長者咧，今日佢哋。 有啲喺北華後啊、寶園嗰邊咧，都跟我嚟支持我哋呢個社區會議。咁咧首先我亦都非常代表我哋啲老人家咧，感謝馬議員辦公室嘅 Ricky、Maggie 係啦。咁咧佢哋都係經常咧都好幫助我哋啲老人家嘅。我好經常帶啲老人家咧。 去到佢哋辦公室咧，有咩 issue 咧，佢哋都會幫我哋解決。譬如搞咩嗰啲license 嗰邊可以減免老人家嗰啲嘅費用啊。呢個就係我係啦，我而家會講噶啦。首先我係先要多謝馬議員有一個咁嘅議員代表我哋嘅老人家喺州議會嗰度發表。 代表我哋嘅聲音，所以我哋好多謝。咁我亦都好鼓勵我哋啲長者咧，唔好以為話今日我導言大家嚟，好多人都會話，佢都講都係冇用嘅咧，我哋又聽唔到，又講咗都係冇用。 而唔係咁嘅。正話馬議員都講到啦，我哋每年帶隊大家一齊去到州議會，我哋嘅出現就已經係對馬議員嘅最大嘅支持，因為馬議員咁就可以話俾啲議員聽，我嘅社區嘅人今日有嚟到反映佢哋嘅意見，呢個就係對佢嘅最大支持，係咪啊，馬議員？係啊，所以咧咁我哋咧都好多謝有馬議員，亦都好多謝我哋啲長者，你哋咁辛苦，今日天氣咁熱，仲要喺咁熱嘅地方嚟到呢度。咁啊，而家我先入到我個問題嘅正題啦。我嘅想法咧就係話，而家咧我哋啲長者咧係好中意我哋 CBCC 有一個好好嘅 program， 就係教大家玩手機。講玩手機啊，其實唔係玩啊，係一個好重要嘅聯繫社區嘅一個社交嘅方式嚟嘅。而家我哋一個鐘之出去，咁多人都睇到，但係好多唔識玩喎。點不知咁樣撳個掣，原來就咁知道咁多嘢㗎啦，咁樣。咁但係咧，因為我哋啲budget cut咗咧，就變咗咧就冇咁方便啦。咁我哋好多老人家都同我反映咧，即係話呢一個項目好好，希望我哋州政府咧議會咧可以繼續支持我哋能夠有呢方面嘅幫助。仲有咧，而家我哋社區好多長者啊，都好需要有佢哋嘅文化生活，同埋佢哋嘅社交嘅生活。咁樣咧就好需要有 budget 俾我哋提供一啲場地，同埋提供一啲嘅器材啊各方面。咁啊，多謝陳主任同埋我哋 CBCC 咧，提供個 office 俾我哋每個星期四都有一個少少嘅2個鐘頭嘅活動。冇辦法咧，我哋都冇其他嘅地方可以有咁樣嘅場地。咁啊，希望馬議員幫我哋睇下有冇揾到一啲 budget 俾我哋我哋啲長者係咪？係嘛？大家話係咪啊？鼓掌！
I can translate for people. So, Mrs. Wong was, so she was complimenting the staff and saying that, our office does a really good job, serving our constituents, especially, the senior constituents. And that there are senior constituents who have come from other neighborhoods, including the north side, to attend this event. And she wanted to emphasize to them that your voice does matter, that it makes a difference, when you come out and support, people that will, do a good job and be your voice in Springfield. It makes a difference. And, she was saying how, it has made a difference to visit me in Springfield and to come interact with my office and provide feedback, because it gives me the ability to advocate for more resources, to talk to my colleagues about the importance of serving this community. And she also said that her question was about whether there's any funding to support an organization like CBCAC, because they provide really important programming and services for the seniors, including the one that she mentioned that has to do with helping seniors become more comfortable with using technology, and also having the educational activities and programming that they provide. And so my answer is, well, that's an easy one, because one of the things that I left off that list of budgetary impacts to the community is that, this year, not every year do we have this, but some years legislators have discretionary amounts of money that we can grant out to organizations in the district that's doing good work. And so, I was able to provide some grant funding to CPCAC, as well as Project Vision and a few other organizations in the district. Freedom Center a few years ago got some funding to repair the roof tiles. But that's another thing that I'm able to do, in my capacity as state representative. The more I see what's happening in the community and the work that is being done, the more I can keep that in mind when I do have access to resources like that. We were given, this past year, almost $2 million to grant out, and I gave a good portion to CBCAC, as well as Project Vision. So those are some of the organizations in Chinatown that got recent grants from my discretionary funds.
Thank you.
There's a question from online. Can Representative Ma provide a better contact email address? People have sent emails to the general office email and with questions and concerns that they have not been answered. So it should be office@Theresa.com. That goes to staff. And, we're usually pretty good about answering those emails. It's possible we've fallen behind, and the summer, like I said, we have 5 summer interns, and so we're getting a little more help with catching up with some of those office tasks. So we'll try to be better, and hopefully catch up to if we're behind. But that's the best email to contact us on, office@Theresa.com. We get, that email gets checked every day, all day long. Right.
Are there any other questions of Lucy?好高興今日落住我嘅字，好高興啊！今日咧能夠參加呢個會議。我咧就大概個零星期咧就睇到呢個華埠團嘅漁民啊，呢個即係嗰個微信啊就登咗呢個咁嘅信息，咁我就覺得嗱，譬如漁線啊，可能都係冇咩關，但係直到今日為止咧，我都覺得應該去傾一傾。我哋再做咁樣，乜嘢都知道啊，到底個預算係點樣搞咁而家基本上咧有少少，因為唔識英文啊，雖然有個翻譯咁嘅機，但係又方便。咁好在咧，今次有個黑板嘅寫啲咁都明白個啊。我就覺得咧，好似華人啊、北華埠啊，有好多嗰啲組織咧，都已經成立咗20-30㗎啦啊！政府知道佢哋好多嘢。佢哋辦得好好啊！從懷孕到死亡一條線啊，同埋呢個提供呢個職業啊，即係點樣介紹工作等等，佢哋好成熟啊！呢個華埠團結聯盟咧成立咧，可能係60年嘅話，我唔知有冇10年啊。27年，我27年，但係有時睇報紙咧就知道啊。華埠團結聯盟有個陳真華啊，到底佢做啲咩事咧？我當時都係唔知，後來就搬去天河城啊，咁人講啊嗰度啊又呢個幫人哋上網即係好型啊咁樣啊，慢慢知道，最後來佢哋響呢個星大廈對面嘅311啊，咁呢個開始工作，咁方便啊。當時喺天河城邊度啊，我都唔知，我就知 知道一個謝乜嘢名個顏字喺嗰度睇落睇佢都係佢嘅招牌咁最後搬到呢個華學園招對面好方便咁所以咧慢慢所以慢慢咧，佢哋開始個活動好多咁我哋咧好受益乜嘢都睇信啦，凡係有啲咩問題咧，好熱心我總係覺得咧華師處我一嚟到而家我嚟咗27年啦嚟到廣州嚟到美國咁佢哋咧係好多服務，但係呢個華僑同啲移民咧，可能真係可以講係非牟利嘅呢個咁嘅組織。雖然華人咧成日咧就登報紙美中最大嘅非牟利組織啦，實質上成日都攞錢嘅政府之後好多。咁我亦都參加過華師處嘅廚師班每年籌2次，我哋喺度嚟搞廚師嘅嘢政府，1年2次，真係好多錢所以個資金又好豐厚，而且咧經常得到政府嘅幫助。咁佢哋咧可能都係冇咩錢我估計咁都能夠為我哋真真正正咁去服務，我好感動。一個咁樣嘅細細呢個組織咧，減培訓費500人已經係超標啦。而家仲第2個群咧有成300幾，一個咁樣非牟利嘅咁嘅組織係嘛，能夠得到我哋大家嘅歡迎信賴係嘛，真係的確好唔容易。咁我自己咧係聽出嚟，我喺華人裏邊咧，我10幾年前咧曾經就係計算機電腦我唔識，係咪呢個搞下呢個計算機？我哋作為呢啲咁樣嘅又文又啞又唔識開聲，而家搞個電腦都應該咩？最後我睇咧有成10幾部電腦當時係震驚嗰個咁係搞上咁後來我又即係比較唔知道要上班咁圖書館有個話咩搞電腦，最後又學手機，咁慢慢學少少，咁又冇咗啦。咁咧最後我就建議係咪咧呢個我哋老人家好需要係嘛呢個科技，咁咧話我哋啲員咧又搞到上嚟，都辦得有聲有色。但係而家呢講咧唔幫冇咁老人，我覺得美國對老人家咧好好從生活上家務助理各方面真係好關心我乜嘢，所以子女咧同我哋中國比，我哋要中國嘅就係要關心老人，要善待呢度老人。我聽講18歲，啲細路仔離開唔使嚟，但政府就對佢哋老人家乜嘢都幫助。但係我覺得咧，雖然手機係咪係好需要佢哋咁深為我哋，但係都需要經費，係咪從呢個角度響呢州裏邊邊度我哋經費都冇支持呢個咁樣嘅活動，等我哋提高同呢個社會上冇傳説咁樣啦。咁我就覺得呢個經費應該會少少仲有一個咧，我就想問下，我哋咧就話呢個我哋整個中國人嘅高中真係整好多年啦。3次嘅請願去遊行遊行最後咧就落實咗，香港買完有5000萬嘅錢呢個已經準備咗。咁選仲未選到錢，咁我就好擔心啦。而家政府又冇錢，到底呢筆錢仲有冇咧？會唔會係挪用咗咁我好想呢個問題。仲有我曾經睇到報紙就話咧房屋管理局批准咗CDS 就呢個公立學校嘅喺24間有笪地方咧就可以租用99年已經係批准咗。我睇到又話當地啲人咧反對咁而家又不了了之咁樣。咁呢個地址係咧，我今日又經過28間、29間個，大概26間到28間啫，仲有個地方，我大概半年前咧，我睇到有個啤牌，我想同阿陳主任講唔記得咗今晚睇圍住嗰啲 啲提醒為咗係做咩做咩用途咧？我唔知。如果係嗰度雖然細細地，能夠咧入報中嗰個地點又好，又係呢個細路仔關係都幾咩嘅。咁雖然係細啲，但我覺得咧文化課一個學校上文化課，呢個潭碧屏嗰度咪有一個咩嘢？體育館上體育館上籃球或者係呢個游水呢啲可以即係又可以租用，係咪咧？快碎咧就整呢個高峰，我總係有咁嘅感覺。但係嗰2個月，我無意中呢個華人嘅後邊，又有一個動起，已經係整咗個咩基建嘅咩老人家豪華嘅住宅，嗰啲開發商一比係想賺錢。邊度好多人整啦？咁我哋已經係真正係為咗呢個大家嘅咩就地息佔咗，所謂23間嘅3棟賣俾呢個老人家，本來咧就開發商佢就真係呢㗎。如果唔係開發，我哋咧做一個好㗎嘛。我就希望咧大家最選嗰個城市就成日個高中咧，大家好多老人家嗰啲紙我諗平時嗰個做工都同反映，我希望大議員咧盡量感到大家我哋都選呢個咩李慧華馬靜嘅嗰個學校都仲未有着落，所以我咧就今日咧就講一講就講嗰啲家長嗰個小眾係咪？咁馬靜儀的確對我哋做咗好多事，我都係好感謝我。
Thank you, 我明白。Okay, so yeah, I'll just briefly summarize. The first part, she echoed Mrs. Wong's compliments CBCAC's work, especially with the program that helps seniors with technology and getting online, and thinks that it's really worthwhile and important, and that there should be more funding for programs like that. And I agree, and let's try to find it and maybe find partnerships with other entities that do that, and maybe we can do more of that in the Chinese community. The second part of her question was about again, the fate of the Chinatown High School site. She sees that it's still vacant land, and thinks that it is a really good idea to have a high school on that site. And so I just want to reiterate that I know it's an important project for the community, and that I was the lead person in securing the capital funding for that. But again, it's something that we have to work out with the city, and we have to start the discussions with the city. The ball's in their court. So I don't have the ability to do anything at the moment, but we'll restart conversations with them. So I don't know if you want to translate for her.
I think they go soon. I think all I encourage you, but I find it doesn't charge. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions, then thanks for having me, and please know that you're welcome to reach out to me at any time. And I do value the partnership with CBCAC. I don't know how many of you know that at one point, more than 10 years ago, I was also a staff member at CBCAC, so I have very deep understanding of the importance of their work in the community, and appreciate it very much, and value what they do a tremendous amount. So and this is a testament to their work as well. Thank you all for coming out and spending your evening learning about how state government works and how budget gets passed. I hope you'll continue your engagement and, participate in the programs that, CPCAC has organized. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative Ma. Our next quarterly town hall will probably, likely take place in September, but we will, give, some more information, but thank you very much. And, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to CPCC or to the representative's office. 如果你哋仲有咩問題，歡迎你關嚟落我個票，或者去馬正賢嘅辦公室喺辦公室係，多謝晒。